gangguan teknikal. Bagi memastikan kelancaran majlis, para hadirin dimohon untuk mengurangkan pergerakan keluar masuk Dewan ketika sidang berlangsung, beretika, sentiasa menghormati persidangan dan mematuhi tata susila. Majlis kini mengumumkan perarakan masuk para peserta sidang akhir debat antara Asasi 2025 kategori Bahasa Inggeris. Majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan.
Hello and welcome everyone to the finals of the pertandingan debat antara Asasi 2025. On our government side, we have, a round of applause for everyone who's made it this far. On our government side, we have University Malaya, on their home court. And on our opposition side, we have UITM-B. Sounds like there's a lot of fans in the crowd. That's good to hear. So my name is Ibrahim. I will be the head judge for this round. Alongside me is a lovely panel consisting of Nagesan from UMK, Liwei from UTM, Hanafi from IIUM, Hanabil from IIUM, I myself am from IIUM. We have Shashita from Unimas and Gauri from Unimas as well. So there will be 7 judges adjudicating these finals. It looks like it's very tense and heated right now, so we hope to see a very wonderful final commencing. If there are no further objections or there are no complaints or no problems, I think we can start soon. But before that, just like to check, everyone's okay on stage, everyone's fine, no problems at all? Okay, if there are no further problems, then we can commence. I invite the Prime Minister to open up today's debate. Here.
Panel. ASEAN was born of a desire for peace, but inaction and silence challenge the very peace we hold dearly. We believe now is the high time for ASEAN to move to a new point in its history. We propose. Let's look at 3 points of framing before I move on to my argumentations. Firstly then, on the key principles of ASEAN. Besides of what's already explained in the info slide about a strong emphasis on national sovereignty and a commitment to non-intervention in the affairs of member states, we think that ASEAN is heavily beholden to the consensus model, a model where one country can veto collective action of all the other countries within the community. This means that countries that have a strong tie with foreign powers often block consensus. We see this happening in status quo when Cambodia, with their strong ties with China, often block the ASEAN consensus in regards to the South China Sea so that China can get their own interests, right? All of this means that there are harms innate in status quo where you enable the ASEAN way to continue. First, it enables human rights violations, right? Because look at Myanmar's military coup in 2021. We think that coup only happened insofar as ASEAN allowed it to happen because of its soft approach. 2, it paralyzes the effective decision-making that any collective union should have, right? Because the inability to respond means the inability to react quickly to crisis, so far meaning that you allow inaction and further suffering to happen under your side. Thirdly, is that it enables external powers to exploit decisions that are happening within this region. China uses bilateral deals to get their way all the time. We see this with countries that have strong ties with China, like Cambodia, like whatever other countries in ASEAN, right? All of these things are harms that exist within status quo, and they have to defend that. Secondly, note that this is a value judgment debate. This means there's no burden on our side to prove how ASEAN will abandon this way, right? We just think that it is principally a better way, a better situation if ASEAN just forgone all of these ways and move on to another way. How would the world look like under our side, right? This looks like a world where no ASEAN country has any veto power. Insofar as we can prove to you that there are no longer a use of the ASEAN way and that there are harms currently and further harms that will be accrued in the future if we pertain and hold on to this ASEAN way, we think the ballot ought to give to be Malaya. First argument then as to how ASEAN ought to abandon this way. Note, Judge, that ASEAN was initially founded to protect Malaysia from Ganyang Malaysia. That's why Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines banded together to form things like your ASA, to form things like your Maafilindo. Why? This is because they want to prevent a country from forcefully stopping a country to achieve sovereignty. Why is this then, secondly, not applicable now? We think that there aren't any countries actively halting another country from forming. We think countries like Timor-Leste, we think countries like Malaysia have already formed. So, all of the things that ASEAN was initially founded, all of the reasons why ASEAN was first founded in the first place have been achieved, and therefore there is no reason, principally, for us to hold on to this way. Note, secondly, then, since ASEAN's main focus is on economic stability and on the security, we think that the ASEAN way just gets in the way of dealing with these better. The intuition here is really simple, Judge. Some countries have closer ties with China, but some countries have closer ties with the United States of America. Insofar as you allow countries to have veto power, you block other countries' methods of gaining better economic stability, because then only countries with the most amount of bargaining power within ASEAN can have it their way, and therefore other countries will be relegated to a lower position. We think that is principally harmful. The counterfactual on our side cannot be clearer. By removing this, by removing and abandoning this ASEAN way, right, you are able to have deeper debate, because you really consider to the fullest degree in all policies that ASEAN is going to pass. Note, no countries can just veto stuff now, so that you prevent the ability of external powers from coming in. When all countries have the equal amount of bargaining power under our world, you allow for countries to have better policies at the end of the day. Better policies that affect the most amount of people under our side. Better policies that can mean less people suffer on the ground under our side. This is just beneficial. Before I move on to elaborations, sure.
How do you have equal power if you're giving more power to veto nations?
We think that under our side, countries just have enough bargaining power to make it for their own way, right? Because note that ASEAN currently has countries that have large bargaining power and that countries that have less bargaining power. Insofar as you remove this, we think that countries with better bargaining power are going to be benevolent, because they have the interests of their own countries within ASEAN. In the first place, they have to care for countries within the bloc, and that's just intuitive. So I don't understand what that POI is trying to do. Why then will smaller countries with less bargaining power will have more say under our side? And this is directly responding to that POI, right? Yes, we think that this is a possibility under our side, but note, under their side, it is blocked completely, right? In status quo, there is no way or no chance for smaller countries with less bargaining power to have a say, because bigger powers like China, like the United States of America, already have ties with countries within the ASEAN bloc. This means that these countries will always have the veto power. This means that these countries will be the one that's controlling your ASEAN, right? So, insofar as you remove and abandon all of these things that prevent smaller countries from having the bargaining power, we think that that is a good accrued under our side. That's just net benefit that can only be exclusive under our side, right? The weighing here cannot be more simple, Judge. Op may come up here and say that you threaten the sovereignty of these countries. Note that sovereignty is not absolute. It's just a trophy of countries when they become independent to flaunt to other countries that haven't reached independence yet. Note that now, these circumstances of some countries within ASEAN itself justify intervention and help in order to make less people suffer on the ground. Why should we care about sovereignty when millions of people are dying in Timor-Leste? When a military coup is happening in Myanmar and is pushing refugees out into other countries within ASEAN. So we think on both sides, a terrible democracy is a terrible democracy at the end of the day. Bom Marcos is still continuing the war of drugs by shooting people that have access to drugs, right? So all of this, Judge, goes to show to you that only under our side can we best protect the most vulnerable stakeholders within this debate. Only under our side will, smaller countries within ASEAN itself, have the possibility and the capability to have more bargaining power to get their say on what ASEAN will do. And only under our side do you stop inaction from further happening. The win ought to go to Malaya.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that fine speech. We call upon the Leader of Opposition to open the opposition half of today's debate. Here.
Panel, This unique approach, rooted in respect for sovereignty and concession, has been the cornerstone of regional cooperation, ensuring stability and harmony amidst of our diverse nation. Note that. But before that, some counter setup to do their job really, really well. First, how does ASEAN cooperate as a bloc? This means that if one member gets accepted, they need to accept all of the other members that exist in ASEAN. This also means that they are the fifth largest economic bloc because they export variety of things. For example, Malaysia is famous for semiconductors and also materials, and tourism for Thailand. Those are example and etc. This also means that the treatments are with bloc, for example, ASEAN and Korea, that will increase the scale of activity much further. Second thing, what are the characteristics of ASEAN, which is clearly they miss on that thing? Two things. First, about economy. They operate on different economy services, which means, for example, manufacturing, raw material, tourism, etc. Note that ASEAN is an economic bloc, which means that they need to have this thing that clearly they don't understand about that. Second, about politics, they don't have interaction. This means they have diversity of ideology. For example, Malaysia had colonialism, Myanmar is the colonist, for example. So this is the only way for ASEAN to uplift all of the members through economic bloc. Clear of the
Point.
counter setup? Later. Now, on to the rebuttal. Clearly, all of the prime ministers' argument is all about veto power, which means that, okay, first, we have to accept that the problems in consensus, right, that to achieve consensus, veto power takes away sovereignty. This means that stronger powers exploit the marginalized and also the majority of developing nations within. This also means, like, I have a question actually, but why is veto power is their only argument on their side? Because they can talk about all other things that are much better, but you can't bring about human rights if you talk about veto power. So now, to clear things up, two arguments today, which is why physical interference is harmful. Second, how is leaving ASEAN is against the best interests of ASEAN. First, three things is under my analysis. First, it will allows others to...
Point.
What we mean by interference is only physical interference. This means that allowing others to interfere means that under few reasons, which is if we allow this, interference by external actors will lead to members of ASEAN being antagonized. What do I mean by this? Three things. First, ASEAN is unstable, right? This means that our politics or even our nation are that unstable, which play a big role in why physical interference exists, because it will then lead to other nations getting their weapons up. So what will happen if other nation brings their weapons up? This means that if one of them are already armed, others will also be ready, causing them to fight each other. Do we want ASEAN to be like that? And at the end of the day, they will be on edge, causing more problem that will lead to more conflict. You name it. All of the conflict that will cause people will die, all of the civilians, and all of those people that don't even have to do with this have to suffer. What are the second analysis, which is drain resources? We know that military is not only going to be costly, right?
Point.
Because all of our resources will be also decreasing. Why? Three things. For example, our money will also be flown around, our weapons, our potential of human being that could die even be erupted and also increase. So the problem with that is all of these things, just like I said before, we are unstable, even politics or even other things. So if we do the interference, especially physical interference, how are we going to cope with this thing? How are we going to do with and also cater with all of the potential that could exist that they don't even know will exist in the future? Which is clearly they don't even think really well about the potential of human dying. That is basically what is we trying to implement right now.
Point.
And note that, knowing that we are an economic bloc, which we need to pivot our economy. So what are the comparative actually on this argument? We could help people, but not only in physical or military way. This is by the virtue of edge or antagonizing that we also be non-existing in the first way. So what are the impacts? Future wars might occur that could even cause people dying or even countries turning them back with each other. So imagine this. Imagine that countries within the ASEAN turns their back with each other. Imagine that the countries that at the end of the day will kill or even like disrupt all of the other things will happen. Do they want them? I don't think so. Do you want them as the panels? Because if we allow this thing to happen, people will die and eventually like countries will, at the end of the day, will be non-existing. So the bloc of ASEAN will slowly dysfunction and even brought even more harms to the civilians. Next argument: how living ASEAN way will be going against because of the interests of ASEAN. First, what are the inherents of ASEAN? What are the characteristics? Firstly, note that panel that economy is the role of us economic bloc. ASEAN is to have the economical thing because of what? Because of the history and also the politics. Under history, it means that the territorial dispute and politics under the disparity within the region. This means that we as ASEAN are already focused on economy, which means that we need to have this thing further. The goal of ASEAN is to uplift of all members nations, right? This means that majority of nations are developing, that have unstable institutions that they just don't understand about the global position that put us in the risk of exploitation. The trade is priority to do so because like if we secure economic capacity or even finance, we need to uplift those things. We need to uplift these things. So this means that trade partners relationship will cracks and also will create leverage in diplomatic dealings. Even though we can't sanction them, we can minimize the dealings within ASEAN. So abandoning ASEAN then will create new priorities that we cannot allow. Cannot allow that we are going to be the same with EU because we don't want wars. We cannot see people dying much further. With that, I'm so happy to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Leader of Opposition. Just a reminder, try not to badger. If someone puts you down, they're probably going to accept you closer to 6 minutes. But yeah, without further ado, Deputy Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
The reason why the debate was won from Shoaib's speech was because it is in the status quo where people are dying. It is in the status quo where Myanmar's military coup kills people. It is in the status quo that Bongbong Marcos silences his opposition and continues the war on drugs. We propose, their side of the House fails to determine what the reason as to why is it that ASEAN actually implemented the ASEAN way originally was. Why is it that ASEAN initially wanted to perform the ASEAN way? Why was this possible? The first reason as to why ASEAN way was created in the first place, as Shoaib told you excellently, was because they wanted to prevent Indonesia from stopping Malaysia from forming to Ganyang Malaysia, because they were sending in military and guerrilla warfare into the areas and stopping the country from attaining sovereignty. So on your side of the House, that's the reason why the ASEAN way was created back then. But note, this debate isn't this House regrets the ASEAN way. This House believes that ASEAN should abandon it. Meaning that as long as we prove that it doesn't fit inside the current moment and status quo, and why is it that in the future it might cause extent of harm, as Shoaib told you, we ought to win this debate, which they never responded to. The only thing, and their Hail Mary in the debate, was to say that ASEAN focuses on the economy, and therefore, because we intervene, people die. Where got economy lead to people die? I don't know what is the line of logic here to assume that physical intervention would lead to horrible outcomes if it was really true that it was about the economy. Let's assume that people die. This was just an impact, but they never prove as to how is it that the levels onto reaching that impact was going to be possible. They never told us how is it that the physical intervention would always mean military intervention and killing people within villages under the status quo. They never prove as to why is it that the ASEAN way would stop, the ASEAN way would stop any forms of problems that Shoaib told you currently within Myanmar or currently within South China Sea that they never still responded to. This was then contingent upon ASEAN's interest as to the economy, right? I don't think that economy is just the number one and only interest within ASEAN currently, right? Because obviously there are
Point.
things like your security and your social issues, your political issues that you have to take into consideration. But sure, let's assume that this was about the economy. One, the EU still trades with Russia, despite the fact that they, have a war against Ukraine. A lot of countries still trade with China, even though they have a lot of human rights violations. So even if the countries under your side of the house are essentially harmful and the economy was really, really important, likely it will still happen anyway. But second, how do we prove that the interest of ASEAN is likely to be achieved on the outside of the house? Under their side of the house, when you continuously have external powers coming into your area, like for instance, how Singapore has the US military base in Changi Airport, how for instance we have a lot of like US and China boats within the South China Sea. China makes man-made islands all, and they perform things like your military trainings or your nuclear bomb testings. All of this affect your trade routes. All of this affect your ability for countries to import and export with each other. What happens then? The economy becomes ruined. So under your side of the house, it becomes worse. They never prove that. Secondly, security is so important within the interest of ASEAN because likely no country essentially wants World War III to happen. No country wants any ability or any forms of problems with intervening with each other from essentially occurring. So likely, they want to make sure that no country currently is causing any problems within the proximity of the area. So likely, they want to make sure that they intervene then. That is how the interests of ASEAN essentially then met. And why is it that the ASEAN way should then be abandoned? Arguments. Why, absent of the ASEAN way, ASEAN countries has more ability to self-govern without external forces? What happens under our side of the house? When we abandon the ASEAN way, we make sure that no country has any absolute veto power over anything that essentially occurs. What happens then now? Smaller countries have the ability for discussions and the ability to challenge any forms of policy that essentially is discussed upon. Their side of the house says that we give power towards veto countries. What veto countries? Singapore, is it? Malaysia? Which one is the veto country? They never explain why that was possible. So why is it then, on the outside of the house, we're able to make sure that these self-governing principles are able to be upheld? Since ASEAN really focuses on the economy, what happens now is that countries are able to have equal say within ASEAN and be able to finally discuss and debate upon what's best interested towards ASEAN currently. What is the counterfactual on their side of the house? Under their side of the house, Cambodia, for instance, who really, has close ties with China, for instance, can just say, your policy wants to control and make problems within the South China Sea, okay, so we veto. What then happens? This has happened before in 2012, when no forms and ability for, joint statements weren't able to be issued within the South China Sea. So this has happened before, and we have seen this happen, this external harm that we ought to protect. But next, it's just about the authoritarian regimes that essentially exist within ASEAN, right? Let's be honest, guys. A lot of ASEAN countries really have problems with their democracy. Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi was a really terrible person governing that led towards the military coup happening to begin with. We believe that if absent of this ASEAN way, we're able to challenge and able to finally tell Myanmar, hey, what you're doing is problematic, you should probably do something about it. It would have prevented the ability for people to essentially then be killed. But let's assume then that this was then not even possible to begin with. At the very least, we achieve discussions, and that's what's better on the outside of the house. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
Organizations like the United Nations are also harming or calling out these human rights issue in the first place all over the world. Yeah, we still see that happening. How does that suddenly stop under your side?
How does that stop? I don't see that stops. What are you talking about? The United Nations will exist on the both sides of the house. I don't know why you are trying to say that United Nations has absolute power once ASEAN has the ASEAN way. On the outside of the house, we have more power to tell the ASEAN countries, hey, what you're doing is wrong. On the outside of the house, we have greater ability for us to be able to voice out these concerns then. Next, it's just on the authoritarian regimes then. Their side of the house wants the autonomy and sovereignty of the country. Why is it that this was just unimportant and far worse on their side of the house? Sovereignty is not an absolute, as Shuaib told you. It's just a trophy for independent countries to make sure that they're able to form and cater towards the human rights of their civilians. Certain ASEAN countries who are dictatorial and silences the opposition has taken over or has not met the standards to be considered as sovereign countries and to be able for us to finally intervene then to be able to stop the human rights violations that are essentially occurring. Under their side of the house, you prevent the ability for any forms of calling out and conversations to occur. You make sure that certain countries are just opting out of any problems that occur and that currently occur within countries and prevent the intervention then. For all those reasons, the trophy remains here at home.
Thank you very much, DPM, for that fine speech. We call upon the DLO to continue for the opposition bench. Yeah.
Panel, I just want to ask a really quick question. What is veto? Veto is when you have the power as a single nation to say no to an entire motion and you're able to stop it right there. So they told us that through ASEAN consensus, one nation can say no and then everyone has to say no. And that's bad. But they are pushing veto, which is one nation says no, so everyone has to say no. Therefore, they have no case because their entire deputy speech knifed their own case. They told me, we asked them, okay, how do you solve human rights problems with veto power if it's not being solved on our side of the house? They told us, solve it? Why do we have to solve it? I tell you, that is your entire case. You told me that you are solving how Myanmar is undergoing a military coup. You told me that you're stopping civilian deaths. You told me that you're halting all these issues. And yet somehow when I ask you directly how you're stopping and how you're mechanizing that stopping, you say, no. You tell me, okay, we say that, okay, military is the best way to do this. You say, oh, we're not going to do military. Oh, military doesn't cause deaths. They carry guns. Someone is going to die. Okay, few pieces of clarification then. First and foremost, why is no intervention our policy in the first place? Because of the disparity of ASEAN politics. They acknowledge this in their speech. We have dictators, we have communists, we also have liberal democracies. We say that that is exactly why we can't interfere with each other in order to protect our own interests and in order to protect our own sovereignty, because principally, sovereignty is the most important thing in this debate, which they accept. Sit down. Furthermore, we say that when we abandon the ASEAN way, we create new priorities. When you abandon the ASEAN way and you say, okay, we're no longer focusing on economy primarily, we're focusing on politics. Okay, what does that mean? You have to push conformity of ideology. You have to say that everyone then has to agree to push one single ideology. So how are you going to get Myanmar and their Cambodia and their communism? How are you going to get them to agree with Malaysia's democracy? How are you going to get Cambodia and their Chinese alignment to agree with Malaysia and their net neutrality policy? You're never going to be able to. That's exactly why this exists in the first place. So what does this then do? We say that unanimous decision making, okay, we say that veto power is unfeasible on their side of the house. They never tell me who gets the veto power. So let's do some logic here. We say that the people who get veto power are the people with the most military might. That means that Singapore is going to get it, Malaysia is going to get it, Laos and other smaller nations aren't going to be able to have say, which destroys their whole point about giving smaller nations voices. So then how then do we ensure sovereignty on our side of the house? First and foremost, what does sovereignty look like for ASEAN? We ensure sovereignty within ASEAN through this principle, through the ASEAN way. We ensure that you will not be interfered with internally and externally, and that you are able and you have a right as a country to push your own ideology and to continue your own life, because if you do not have this, what then happens? What happens is that you are no longer a nation. Without sovereignty, without borders, you can't have a nation. Take it.
Yeah, I'm not sure you understand what the ASEAN way is. We aren't saying that any country has any veto power. You still discuss, you come to a decision at the end of the day, you continue to fight. Why is it on your side of the house certain veto powers can actually exist? What is this about?
Panel, hurry up. Panel, first and foremost, they told me in first that it's veto. They tell me in second that it's still veto. They tell me, what is ASEAN way? ASEAN way is discussion. You have to make unanimous decisions. You have to agree on something as an entire whole, and ASEAN operates as a bloc. That's the ASEAN way. ASEAN way is also prioritizing economy. Why do we prioritize economy? Because we're all developing nations. We're all developing nations, which means we're all vulnerable stakeholders. If we then say that, okay, economy is no longer our priority, we're going to prioritize pushing intervention, what then happens? If you undermine Myanmar, so let's say you undermine Myanmar's sovereignty, you invade them and you say, you have to stop killing people. What happens? They can't continue their economic policy. What then happens to people on the ground? If you can't gain money, if you can't make money through your economic policy, through your economic activities, you're going to suffer. First and foremost, you're already suffering because you're spending money on a military you can't afford. Second, you're going to lose out on economic gains that we get through ASEAN because we're free trade.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happens on your side of the house to be able to solve Myanmar's issue? If every country, 10 countries say, okay, let's do this, then Cambodia say, oh no, let's not do this. That's what
We
your work
say
is.
that we are economic trade partners. We aren't icing them out. We are engaging with them as trade partners. They're going to listen to us. Why? Because even though we can't sanction them because of ASEAN and we have free trade, we can't sanction them, but we can minimize the amount of trade that goes through them. What then does that do? It means that they're going to suffer. They're not going to be able to afford the guns that they're using to kill the people in the first place. Therefore, they're going to try and conform to our demands as much as possible. Why? Because, again, it's within their interest. We are maintaining the only leverage that ASEAN has within itself, which is economic leverage. Okay, so then why is foreign interference unlikely to happen? They keep pushing onto us that on our side of the house, we're going to be exploited. We say that that is more true on their side. Why is this so? Because they allow veto power. They acknowledge that the disparity of ASEAN's politics means that some support China, some support America. So when you give certain countries veto power, what then happens? They're going to congregate around the ideologies that they reflect the most. What does that mean? We're going to have blocks within ASEAN. Blocks within ASEAN means that the entirety of the ASEAN region, the entirety of sea is going to be fractured. When you have fractures, what you have? You have exploitation. Because it's easier to take on a group of 2 nations in comparison to a group of 11. The reason why the ASEAN way exists is to ensure that as a group, we are able to protect each other, we are able to maintain neutrality because of our collective leverage as an economic bloc. If we get rid of that economic priority and we say that, oh, suddenly we're strong enough to push priorities like the EU and the UN, which first and foremost, they're already unsuccessful. How are we going to succeed there when they already fail and they acknowledge that they fail? We say that is the only leverage we have. That is why we have to maintain the ASEAN way. So why, again, is foreign interference unlikely? The dynamics of foreign entities is they trade with us. They engage with us. They buy our stuff. We sell to them. And that means that as long as we maintain trade with them, they're going to stay out of our stuff. Because as long as Malaysia is providing US and China semiconductors, they're not going to have to consider, maybe I should take over the Malacca Strait this year. They're not going to think about that because they're already getting everything they need from the region. If suddenly you push away that priority and you align with China, then the US is going to be like, hey, why do I need those semiconductors still? I'm going to take over you. And you won't have the power in order to stop that because you are fractured as a bloc. And for all those reasons and more, never prouder to oppose.
Thank you very much, Diallo. We call upon the government whip to close. Not yet, not just reply later. Government whip, here.
I think this debate has turned into something really interesting. Clearly, side opposition has the sides turned wrong. They have to defend status quo. What is status quo? Status quo, ASEAN has veto power. They can have, any one country can veto collective action. Countries with strong ties to external powers often block ASEAN consensus. I don't know why they're putting the burden onto us, saying that our counterfactual has veto powers. But it's actually their burden. Because let me reframe, let me bring back what Shuaib said. The ASEAN way is no ASEAN country can tell another country what to do. No collective power can tell, hey Singapore, don't put your military base at Changi Airport. Hey Philippines, let China shoot down your boats. They don't understand that it is their burden to protect, to defend veto powers. So I don't understand, Judge, why they're turning it back to us. But before that, 3 parts in my speech. First, responses. They say they allow for more diversity of ideologies. Judge, understand this very thin line of argumentation because they are technically justifying the millions of people dying, the millions of people suffering under dictatorship, under oligarchs like the Myanmar, they are basically justifying Myanmar's junta, Myanmar's military coup. Secondly, they say military ASEANs are antagonized. How? They provide little to zero impact in their argument, zero to little impact in framing. Let's take them at their best. Even if they do get antagonized at the end of the day, it is good. good because military, all the oligarchs get exposed on the global stage. Dictators get shunned. People want to empower because they want to empower people dying and they want to defend people suffering. Next, they say that our counterfactual allows fracturing and it allows people to come in. But the other people are already here. US, China, they're already here. Fracturing already occurs in status quo. It already occurs on both sides because there's no intervention. The fracturing only occurs because there's no intervention. No one is challenging status quo. No one is challenging the consensus. And it doesn't allow for any form of discussion. Because ASEAN is already the best bloc to help this in this world. Because slow consensus from ASEAN equals death. ASEAN way has already caused lives. Myanmar, ASEAN's non-interference and slow consensus approach allowed for military junta. Because they just simply don't understand. But moving on to my first clash. Which side leads to a better world or to a better ASEAN? How we say first, it benefits all countries. How? Because other countries who are suffering at the hands of a dictatorship, the ASEAN way blocks all and any involvement or say. We prove our burden already. Insofar, we prove there is no use of ASEAN way. Secondly, there are more harms and more reasons for us to abandon it in the first place. Countries like Myanmar and the military coups, status quo is that no countries are able to be involved. So with the abolishment or abandoning the ASEAN ways, other countries can challenge it. Hey, Myanmar, maybe what you're doing to your people is bad. Maybe you should do this instead. Because the other countries just rely on like the countries in ASEAN. Secondly, we allow for a world of better decision making. First, ASEAN is made of many countries, and some of them have closer ties with the US. Some of them have closer ties with China, such as Singapore with the military base, with US military base at Changi Airport, such as Vietnam. Secondly, there's already a conflict of interest I want you to note, judge, within ASEAN. How? Because like I said just now, they have closer ties with the US and China. What is the impact? One, you're able to say, hey Singapore, why don't you get rid of the US airbase because I don't like US? Or because they conflict, they're shooting down my boats, such as maybe like Philippines can tell Vietnam, hey Vietnam, maybe you should stop exporting to China because China is shooting down my fishermen boats. They're building man-made islands in my sea, in my waters. They are just committing international crimes. Without the ASEAN way, we are able to challenge this consensus. We're able to challenge other countries and say, hey, maybe you should focus on ASEAN. You shouldn't focus on your other, we should focus on ASEAN because your other partners like China is just non-beneficial to us. Yes, there are some benefits. Yes, there are some harms, but the benefits are still there. Even if their side doesn't have any form of, because their side, the wing is simple, Judge. Their side doesn't have any form of further discussion or opens the doors for opportunities besides having status quo, which is the veto. Moving on to their world. ASEAN way prioritizes politics, elites, and comforts our own people's rights and regional security. This model embodies bad actors because it looks like ASEAN in the lowest common denominator. Any action that might upset everyone, any member state, it is abandoned, even if it is necessary for justice and human rights. It sends the message, as long as you have sovereignty, ASEAN will never hold you accountable, even if you massacre your own people. The South China Sea, China's aggressive expansion, faces no coordinated action from ASEAN because the Philippine people are still suffering. Boats are being shot. Man-made islands are being made. So far as for that, others had to step in bodies like AUKUS, and it shows the complacency in ASEAN. Because the consensus is impossible when states like Cambodia veto strong action to protect China's interests. What is the impact? Immediate regional crisis worsen ASEAN and will fracture members and will make ASEAN members lose their trust and make it more complicit. Second clash on sovereignty versus regional stability. Sovereignty without responsibility just creates a selfish, fragmented region. Sure, respecting everyone's sovereignty is important. ASEAN way exaggerates this to the point where it is okay with ASEAN countries to commit human rights abuses, destabilize the regions, or just ignore regional agreements completely. Because ASEAN is powerless to act. The sovereignty is interdependent. One country's internal collapse, like Myanmar, civil war, spill over to other broader countries, refugee crisis, and human trafficking, economic shocks. Before that, I'll take a POI. Right, you agree? ASEAN must move from a model of non-interference to conditional sovereignty. Members respect each other and hold each other accountable because that's only achieved on our side, even if it is better. Why? Because one, the ability to challenge, to tell them, point out to dictators that they're wrong, that maybe they should care more about their people rather than just their economic incentives. What is the impact just? First, regional crises will be solved better, much easier for countries to reach a consensus. Secondly, dictators get called out on the global stage, and economics is just far better on our side. Thirdly, ASEAN can call out. They have equal say. They have more deep ongoing discussions, because by removing the ASEAN way, it is the prerequisite for more inclusive debates. It is the prerequisite for solving more global powers. It is ensured to achieve a better and stable economy. Because the weighing is simple, Judge. Yes, we agree that autonomy is better, but what's the point of autonomy and sovereignty if millions of their own people are suffering? What is the point of ASEAN if we can't agree to the consensus that maybe that our people matters more, our people matters first? Because our people are the future of ASEAN, and which is why, Judge, the trophy stays with Malaya.
Thank you very much, Government Whip. We call upon the Opposition Whip to close the substantive portion of today's debate. Here.
There is a reason the ASEAN way is a bounding principle. Before moving on to my two clashes, which side solve conflict and issues better, and next the scale of harm, a few callouts and clarifications. First, let's simplify their case for you. Ladies and gentlemen, they tell you that veto is bad because when one country can veto over other countries, you can never solve issues. Then, when I ask them, then veto exists anyway, then how then suddenly like solve human rights issues? Because we say, and then they responded with, we're not solving human rights issues. Then why are you pushing veto onto us? Because the point of your entire case was to say that the moment veto exists, that is when we are unable to solve this human rights issue. They kept on bringing Ganya. They kept on bringing Myanmar's infliction of human rights. We say that doesn't solve anything on their side. Second clarification then, we're saying that they're running a soft case on veto. What the burden they were supposed to push is how on the non-interference policy. They were supposed to tell us how now they are not going to have the zone of Zopfan, how now ASEAN nations are okay with them interfering each other. We'll prove to you why this is harmful later on. Third, we say that it is not in the interest of ASEAN to even look into this human rights issue in the first place, but even if it is in the interest, we'll explain to you why it's better on our side we solve it. Because we say that on ASEAN, we operate as a bloc. We say that the main thing about ASEAN is how it's a free trading zone, how we're uplifting developing nations, because all of us cannot contend to other developed nations already, and this is the reason ASEAN exists. They told us, literally in the first speaker, ASEAN exists to save Malaysia back then. For call out then, how we ensure sovereignty. Note that on their side, they did not or they do not ensure sovereignty whatsoever. Because on their side, they are defending people interfering one another. Why is sovereignty that important? Because we say that without sovereignty, you are not a nation in the first place. Because in our setup, we have already told you how everyone in different countries have different ideologies and interests. And that is another thing I would like to clarify. Our issue on different ideologies is not an argument, but it's a setup. We see that when you push upon ideologies onto each other, might as well Earth become one country, because now everyone has to have the same ideology. Everyone has to govern their countries in the same way, and this is very harmful. Moving on to my clash then. Which side solves conflict and issues better? What did government tell you? They tell you that now they have veto, now you have better discussion. We told you how we have economic benefit by virtue of ASEAN being an economic bloc. What's the weighing here? Note that we have to concede that discussion happens on both sides. The moment that you are trading partners with another country, that is when you have to negotiate with the other country. That is when you have to fulfill the interests of that country in order to maintain that trading relationship. Second, I would like to say that veto doesn't solve anything. We solve it better. Why is this so? Because we are trading partners, and when Okay, this is to paint a picture, right? If everyone around or revolving ASEAN or foreign entities that are not involved in ASEAN then antagonize and condemn ASEAN for not interfering into Myanmar's issue, right? This is what it will harm ASEAN as a whole. We say this is then how is in ASEAN's interest to then intervene, not physically, which is what they're pushing because we say that causes more harm, but this is through negotiations, this is through better discussion because we know that it will harm ASEAN at the end of the day. So I still say that the interest of ASEAN to politically, not politically, but to intervene in by virtue of discussion still happens. We say that when trade is less, because everyone is condemning you, it will affect ASEAN as an entire bloc. What's the point of having ASEAN anyways? What's the worst case on side of opposition? They'll tell you that the worst case on side opposition is that the issue continues on. We say that at the very least, we continue sovereignty. Because once we start to interfere with other countries within ASEAN, there is no limit in what we can interfere in. Hence, this is why we will continue to undermine the sovereignty that exists for countries. When our sovereignty is undermined, we become more vulnerable. And when we become more vulnerable, this is when foreign entities that are way more developed than us have better power above us. And this is very harmful because we are already unstable bloc. Other entities already have their eyes on us anyways, and they will want to help us because they want better reputation for their country. Now everyone will be fighting to help us. Then the issue becomes way bigger because now you're causing wars with everyone in the globe, not only within ASEAN. We say that a lot of foreign entities are fighting over our issue, but we won't help anyways. This is what is happening in United Nations when they want to interfere like Israel, Palestine. We don't see that solving anywhere on their side, and this is just continue to happen. We say that physical intervention is worse, and this is where I get into for scale of harm. Before that, nice. Now, on scale of harm, we already preempted them by saying that foreign intervention is less likely to happen on our side, because we thought the entire debate in the first place is about how intervention is supposed to happen, right? So what's the way here? We say that the magnitude of impact is way more harmful on their side by virtue of three things. First, interfering with each other will cause even more political conflict. We say that we already set out how everyone has different ideologies, but before I get into that.
Yeah, ASEAN trades economically despite the human rights violations. On the both sides, the economy still happens, the economic activity still occurs. Why is it stopped under yours? Why is it stopped under ours?
Then how are you solving that? Because on their side, they're saying veto, and suddenly they say they're not solving that. But we say now we have better interest, because on their side, then if because if we do not have veto, and we do not have the interest to even in fear in the first place, I don't see how suddenly they solve that issue then. What's the way on magnitude of impact? First, I told you how now interfering with each other will cause even further political conflict. We already set out how there's political disparity within ASEAN nations anyway. Hence, there's a diverse on ideology, and we say that this will cause way more harm. Second then, how now they will cause war within ASEAN countries. Because we say this happens with nature of us being reactive. As per their analysis, they brought up Gaya Malaya. We say that happens because we are reactive nations. We do not want other nations to interfere with us. That is why we're pushing the burden on them, or why suddenly ASEAN nations will be okay with us interfering with each other by virtue of us being very reactive. Panel, what is the point of ASEAN if it is not to protect developing nations? This is why your ITM will win for the first time in 4 years. Go for all.
Thank you very much, Opposition Reply. We call upon, Opposition Reply. Thank you very much, Opposition Whip. We call upon the Opposition Reply to close Opposition half of today's debate. You can start now.
Panel, what side government misses in this entire debate is that the only reason why we are okay, the only reason we're not infighting, the reason why we're able to maintain sovereignty and maintain our territorial lines is because of the ASEAN way. That is the reason it's a founding principle. That is what ASEAN was founded on, because we recognize historically that that is exactly what we have to prevent. We have to prevent us from fighting each other, creating fragmentation, and creating problems. Before that, a few call-outs on that case. First of all, there is no case because they say we have nothing to prove. Every time we push a burden on them, they say, that's not mine to prove, that's not mine to prove, that's not mine to prove. Therefore, what is the point of the debate? If you're pouring nothing into debate, then we shouldn't have a debate and you should just give us the trophy first and foremost. Secondly, they keep flip-flopping on their stance. They say in first speaker that their stance is veto. They say in second speaker that veto is bad. They say in third speaker that, oh, we never said veto in the first place. I can't believe I'm being gaslit on the stage right now because, hey, you did say that veto is your stance, and then you keep flip-flopping between that, no, yes, no. They can't decide on a case because they know that they're going to lose this debate regardless, because they recognize that the reason why ASEAN has survived, the reason why ASEAN has thrived, the reason why ASEAN is such a big economy is because of non-intervention, is because of the way we run things, is because we prioritize economic benefit instead of politics. Furthermore, they keep saying that by having whatever mechanism they have, they're going to solve these human rights issues. But they never tell you how they're going to solve these human rights issues. They never tell you, are you going to create a military? Are you going to push political? We say that we have the leverage, and we prove to you that economic leverage is the best way to do it within the ASEAN context. And we say that that is the best way in order to mitigate these human rights harms, which unfortunately will still happen. But we say we prove it best because instead of directly attacking the country and attacking their sovereignty, we deal with them, we negotiate with them, and we ensure that our interests are protected, and we protect as far as we can the people on the ground. We say that this is the best way to do it exactly because we enable discussion. It's diplomatic, it's saving people on the ground, because we're never going to be in conflict because of unanimity, because we have to reach conscious decisions before we have to come to a consensus before we make any decisions. We say that this is the most diplomatic way, this is the most efficient way, this is the best way, and they provide no alternative. They told you at the start, Judge, that they don't have to provide an alternative. If they're not providing an alternative, how are they getting any of their benefits? How do they get any of their impacts if they don't have a method to get that in the first place? They keep pushing all these burdens onto us. We take on the burden, we mitigate them, we push them, we engage with them, Judge. We meet them where they are, but where they are seems to be in the clouds because that case does not stand on the ground with the rest of us. It stands in a dreamland where magically, even though they acknowledge that the UN doesn't work, that a UN-like system would work in ASEAN. They acknowledge political disparity, but they don't acknowledge the impacts of political disparity. We told you all these reasons. We mechanized, we proved, and yet they still refuse us to meet us where we are. Every single time we bring up a point, they dismiss it offhand. They don't engage with the debate. If that's how they're debating, I'm surprised they made it this far, panel. Furthermore, their case says only rebuttal. They'll engage and then they'll analyze, but I'm not sure what they're analyzing because, again, there is no MEC. There's no proof. There's no reason for them to have this debate because they have no case, they have no stance, there's no concreteness, and we say that we take this debate on proof of scale of harm. We told you already how we're mitigating the harm. We told you how they exacerbate the harm. We told you that at the end of the day, at least, even if these harms continue, we have the leverage to mitigate them. And that is the point of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, opposition reply. We call upon government reply to close the debate today. Here.
If there was anything I learned from nationals finals the other day, there are some principles and cultures that we ought not to let live currently, and therefore the ASEAN way is something that we should also ought to abandon because there are absolute harms and potential harms that may occur. But guys, let's calm down, not belittle anyone and say they didn't deserve to be in the finals, and let's read the motion. Because this debate, one, doesn't necessarily have to prove or put a specific burden of a counterfactual, like we're not going to call it I don't know, the ASEAN method now, I don't know. We don't have to prove there's a different principle towards it. We just have to prove that we're not going to follow in with the current system that upholds the ASEAN way currently. What does this look like? Case filer says, of course, yes, the non-interference, God. But second, the consensus-based decision-making, which I think Op just doesn't really quite understand. What does Shuaib tell you? The consensus-based is saying that each country can veto anything like when they want to. That means that under your world status quo, if a country doesn't want something, out of 11 countries, one country says no, the plan fails. That means that under our side of the house, we don't want to give them that power, and we gave a counterfactual, we were charitable. We said that all countries just have a decision and discuss, and then finally come up to a decision at the end. Even if we don't come to a decision, at the very least, these countries can continue fighting, calling out other countries for problems that exist within their regions. That was what we were trying to fight for on the outside of the house, which quite frankly, opposition decided to ignore because all they wanted to run was that ASEAN was an economic bloc, ASEAN wanted to have stability somehow, and then got the sovereignty point somewhere within their speeches, new material in whip. First, on the economy, we already told you that yes, we respect that ASEAN is an economic bloc. What does an economic bloc do? They have free trade amongst each other. They can just freely, without any like taxes upon it and all, like basically help each other economically. I'm not sure why is it that suddenly taking out the ASEAN way and having some discussions about, hey, you're probably problematic in your human rights, affects any of that trade. Or even if it does, at the very least, we can recognize or we can call out all of these problems to say that if you don't want to recognize the human rights of your civilians, then it is right for us to be able to intervene. It is right for us to be able to stop it. But also, like, I don't know, maybe it's the echo of the mic. I don't know why their side of the house tried to say that we were fighting for the veto. We said, no, we don't want the veto. So, yeah, their side of the house doesn't really prove any of their arguments then. Next, on the sovereignty thing. Why is it that sovereignty ought to be taken out in this context and it's right for us to intervene? Judge, we told you from the very start that there's a spillover effect that occurs when your trade routes are affected, FDI doesn't come in because your region's unstable. All of this affect them economically as they try to claim the economy, and all of this is something that we ought to care about. But secondly, it's just the obligation for us to make sure that we recognize human rights violations and call out countries and say, you don't deserve the sovereignty because you don't count your human rights violations. Like, this is Victor Finkel, 2009 WDC, sovereignty is not absolute. Yeah, that is the same principle that we're applying here to say if you don't care about your human rights, if you silence your opposition, if you run a very silent dictatorship currently within ASEAN, then it's right for us to be able to intervene within these areas. I'm not sure what Iris meant by saying that we're doing fine. We're doing fine because we are, just one of the two very okay countries, but the other countries aren't really doing fine with their refugee crisis, with their problematic democracies, with their military coups, with people dying. All of these problems they don't prove as to why is it that these problems don't outweigh any of their economic concerns or any of their sovereignty concerns on their side of the house. For all those reasons, third time in a row.
Thank you very much, government reply. That concludes today's wonderful debate. Cross the floor, shake hands. No hostility, hopefully, even though there was some back and forth banter on the stage. The judges will commune into the papal conclave and decide who will be the who will be the winner of today's finals.
Test, test. Demikianlah sidang akhir debat antara Asasi 2025 kategori Bahasa Inggeris. Berikan tepukan gemuruh buat kedua-dua pasukan atas perdebatan yang cukup hangat sebentar tadi. Diingatkan hadirin sekali lagi untuk meletakkan telefon bimbit dalam mod senyap atau gegar sepanjang persidangan berlangsung serta mengurangkan pergerakan keluar masuk dewan apabila bermulanya persidangan.